Wildcard in game week 3, wildcard in game week 4, sell Nkunku or just roll the transfer. All four of those options are a deliberation for my team. And in today's video, we are going to come to a conclusion on what exactly to do. Because honestly, I think all four are feasible options. If you look forward to today's video, make sure you do drop a like. Aiming for 350 if you legends could do that. And of course, make sure you do smash that subscribe button for daily fantasy content. Enough waffling. Let's get into today's video. So first up, 8 things that you should know going into game week 3. Love to kick things off with this just to give you a bit of an overarching theme on what to expect. So number 1, the international break is happening between game weeks 3 and 4. And this is massive because I'm seeing a lot of managers wildcarding in game week 3. One of those might be myself, but we need to take into account that there are going to be a lot of players flying out, playing 1 or 2 games and then coming back in 2 weeks time for their game week 4 fixture. And honestly, anything can happen over that international break. So if you are wildcarding right now, you are taking that risk over that 2-week period with the 15 that you are selecting in your team. Number 2, the other major thing is, of course, the transfer window closes on Friday, which at the time recorded is going to be tomorrow. We are still seeing a lot of big teams linked to a lot of big players. For example, of course, Chelsea with Osman. What is that going to do with the impact to one of the most bought players of Madueke? Of course, we won't know that until that sort of transfer happens. But you do need to have that in the back of your mind, especially if you're only making transfers this game week, as anything could happen over the next 24-36 hours. Number 3, Chelsea play tonight in their second leg of the Conference League. They have a fixture against Servette. It's 2-0 off the back of the first leg, but it isn't completely finished. And with a lot of managers buying players like Madueke or Nicholas Jackson, I think it is worth monitoring this game tonight to see if any sort of injuries happen. All it takes is 1 or 2 injuries in the attacking areas, which, you know, Chelsea are susceptible to, and all of a sudden someone like a Christopher Nkunku becomes an option once again. It's far-fetched, but I do think you should wait until we have that Chelsea game out of the window. Number 4, Solanke's price still remains at 7.5 million. I don't know the science behind FPL, but it sounds like his price is locked. If you've held Solanke between now and then, I think you at least keep him until we get the press conference from Ange. He should update you on a time frame for when Solanke is back. If you've held him to now, it makes no sense to be selling him before that press conference. Number 5, Eze, one of the most sold players, actually the third most coming into game week 3. But based on his underlying numbers, we're going to touch on him later on in this video, I actually think he's a keep or even a buy for some teams. I know it's controversial, but sometimes managers can be a little bit knee-jerky and not actually look at the performances of the player. And I think Eze has been fantastic in the opening 2 game weeks. And if you're one of those managers right now that still has him in your team, I definitely would urge you to try and keep him, as I think the fixtures aren't terrible and I think he is playing very well considering he's had no FPL returns. Number 6, Madueke, as we've mentioned, is the most bought player coming into game week 3. And I am a little bit concerned this could be Nkunku 2.0. Now, on that right-hand side, it looks like he definitely has the shirt and he is the perfect fit for Maresca. However, are you going to tell me right now that Palmer, João Felix, Pedro Neto are all going to squeeze into this team as well? It just isn't going to happen. I think we're going to see situations where Nicholas Jackson or Osman leads the line. And again, if Chelsea sign Osman, that is him in that number 9 position. So then we have all of these players competing for 3 spots. There is no world where Madueke is absolutely locked in 90 minutes. We're going to see Cole Palmer operate off the right. We're going to see Pedro Neto come in off the right. I do think for a short term, you are going to get the minutes from Madueke. But if you're looking long term, I think this could be a little bit of a risk similar to that of Nkunku. Number 7, a transfer that happened last night is going to be Aaron Ramsdale to Southampton. Now, while Southampton, of course, being a newly promoted team, not really a team you want to invest in, interestingly, Ramsdale's price is 4.4 million. Now, with Harwood Bellis being a 4 million defender, very difficult for us to justify going to Ramsdale. But if you're wildcarding and you're in a position where you say to yourself, I actually don't think any of the goalkeepers are great, even though you can't bring a major goalkeeper in game week 3, and I wouldn't advise that because he hasn't actually moved to Southampton based on FPL. Once we do get that clarification and he starts, definitely a goalkeeper to keep on our radars if you want to save a little bit of money. And finally, the last option is going to be number 8. Wildcard is very popular in game week 3, but I do think there is a little bit of hesitancy that I would have going into it. I definitely think there are teams that need to use it. We're going to come on to that next, but I would only be using it if you're desperate, but we are going to touch on the wildcard now. But those are 8 things that you need to know going into game week 3. So should you wildcard in game week 3? As I mentioned, that is one of the 4 things that I've been deliberating coming into this game week 3 deadline. So I want to just quickly touch off the pros, the cons, and my overarching thoughts on the strategy and whether I am doing it for my own FPL team. We are going to touch on the fixtures in the next section, so don't worry, stick around for that. We will be deep diving into the teams and players that you need to target. So the first thing I want to put at the top here is just a general tip that is always relevant each and every season when we're looking at the wildcard, and that is only be using your wildcard if you look at your team right now and you see 6 or 7 players that you want to change up. Yes, there are always going to be 3, 4, 5 players that are just glue players that are going to stay in your team regardless if you wildcard, but I would only even consider a wildcard if you have 6, 7 or more players that you need to take out. If it's just a case of your wildcarding to flip Haaland to Salah and maybe do one more upgrade, that is not worth it. I would much rather you take a points hit than use your wildcard because it's such an important chip. I would argue one of the most important chips in the game. Yes, we are going to get 2 of them, one in the first half, one in the second, but getting that first one is really important, and do not even be considering it unless it is 6 or 7 or more transfers for your team. Now, what are the pros of using it in game week 3? Well, first and foremost, you do have the opportunity to jump on good fixture swings. So we're seeing teams like Villa and Chelsea come into a nice run of fixtures now, whereas teams like Newcastle, Spurs, you would argue that a lot of managers have invested in the opening 2 weeks, are starting to come into a bit more of a trickier run of fixtures. So while doing loads of transfers to move between both teams, you can actually just use your wildcard, flip out maybe the 4 or 5 Newcastle and Spurs combined players and change them for Aston Villa and Chelsea players if you would like to. And also I'd put in the same breath, maybe someone like an Arsenal whose fixtures are eventually getting bad. Also, as I stated, you can change your team structure really, really easily. If you started the season really bad with maybe no premiums or maybe too many premiums, the wildcard allows you to completely flip it on its head and go for the strategy that you want to do later down the line. So with someone like a Cole Palmer emerging, not many managers have been able to squeeze in something like a Haaland, Salah and Cole Palmer combination. Maybe you are desperate to do that and the wildcard allows you to it. That is also a viable move in using your wildcard. But I do think there are quite a few reasons not to use it. So first and foremost, as I stated, the international break between game weeks 3 and game weeks 4 is massive. So much can happen over that period. Now, I'm going to sit here and say this. Sometimes it does get overblown. Some people think that there are going to be hundreds of injuries and it's going to completely change it. That's not the case. But I think there's enough doubt over the international break for us ideally not to use it prior to it. So that is one big factor that you need to consider. If you're not worried, then obviously crack on with the wildcard in game week 3. Another thing, is 2 game weeks actually enough information for us? Some teams out there, let's take Aston Villa for example, have had a tricky start against both West Ham and Arsenal. And a lot of people have already come to the conclusion that Watkins is terrible, Aston Villa are terrible picks. And I think 2 game weeks is very, very hard to come to sort of a conclusion to use such an important chip in our teams. I personally think 5 game weeks is still not enough, but enough for us to maybe decide which players are important for our team. So while I think you can wildcard in game week 3, I think 2 game weeks information is not enough to come to a clear conclusion with the players that you're selecting. And finally, we're going to come on to the fixtures in a minute, but I feel like it's actually 1 week too early with those fixture swings. We're talking about Arsenal, for example, coming into a bad run of fixtures. Personally, I think game week 3 is still good. It's game week 4 where we're starting to see that fixture swing. And even though the likes of Aston Villa have a good fixture this week, it still is good in game week 4 onwards. And I feel like forcing a wildcard in game week 3 with the international break, with some teams still having good fixtures, is not the right time to do so. So based on all of this, and again, we're going to come on to my team, I've come to the conclusion that a game week 3 wildcard is only for those managers that are absolutely desperate, for the ones that maybe started with Barco, Kwanzaa, all of those players that you got really unlucky with in Nkunku. That is the only situation I would see a wildcard in game week 3 being viable, or you went for a mad strategy at the start with maybe a bench boost and you went for a completely wild one. Otherwise, for my team, Game week 3 wildcard is out of the window, but it was a consideration at one point. Let me know in the comments if you're planning on a game week 3 wildcard. So bringing it back to my team here, as I've mentioned, I am not planning on a game week 3 wildcard. Here is my team in game week 2, 81 points. We touched on that in a previous video. I think I have enough good players to not justify using a wildcard. I would much rather take a points hit if I was of the opinion that this team needed completely changing. So the big concern with my team right now, of course, is going to be Christopher Nkunku. And this has led me to 3 different paths. Either a wildcard in game week 4, rolling the transfer, which makes no sense, but I'll touch on why, or doing a direct replacement for Nkunku. So we're going to go on to those kind of different paths now to come to some sort of decision on what to do with my team. But I want to just give you a little bit of an overview of what my team's looking like so you can get an understanding of what direction I want to take this team in. So it's always important, if we're looking at a wildcard or we're looking at bringing in a player, we look at these fixtures. Because as I mentioned, game weeks 1 and 2 is great to take a look at some underlying numbers. And I definitely will look at them. But I also think to myself, numbers over the first 2 game weeks are very difficult to come to some conclusions. Whereas the fixtures might actually paint a picture of what could happen in the future. So as I discussed, I want to quickly touch on this, why I am opposed to the game week 3 wildcard. It's because I feel like the fixtures are still good for certain teams, which then swing in game week 4. So take Arsenal, for example. If you were to wildcard in game week 3, unless you were pre-planning a transfer, which again, I do not love the idea of doing so, you probably are then going to avoid Arsenal assets with Tottenham away in game week 4, Man City away in game week 5. But with the fixture in game week 3 right in front of us against Brighton, yes, Brighton has started the season well, but I still want a piece of that Arsenal attack. So again, with a manager being both Saka and Saliba owner, doesn't really make sense moving away from Arsenal in game week 3. It makes way more sense to actually use the wildcard if you wanted to in game week 4 when the fixtures actually get bad. Same applies to something like Liverpool. If you want a wildcard in game week 3, yes, Man United, I think Liverpool will beat them, but do you want to wildcard in game week 3 when you could just do it in game week 4 when they have Nottingham Forest at home? Again, it feels just 1 week too early to do so. And the same applies to Brighton. You look at it here, you always want a piece of Brighton in game week 4 and 5, but game week 3 away against Arsenal, I think if you're wildcarding in game week 3, you kind of have to bring in Brighton assets, but you're almost doing it reluctantly, knowing that you've got them in place for game week 4, and then you have to play out the game week 3 fixture and the international break has to happen. So you are taking that slight risk. And I think that applies to a lot of teams here. Fulham, Villa are all kind of teams that have good long-term fixtures. So it doesn't matter if you wildcard in game week 3 or game week 4 with those players. So all in all, I personally think a game week 3 wildcard doesn't make sense, but I think a game week 4 wildcard absolutely does for your teams. But again, if you can push that wildcard a little bit later back, it just gives you a few more game weeks to come to some sort of conclusions. But based on my team, I have not ruled out a game week 4 wildcard. Now, when we take a look at just general teams to target, we're going to touch on my Nkunku replacements in a minute, but some teams that have a great 1 week in isolation fixture is going to include Brentford, Southampton at home, followed by game week 4 and game week 5 being awful. That is a perfect example. If you're sat there with Nkunku and you're pretty happy to wildcard in game week 4, actually doing Nkunku to an Mbeumo is absolutely on the cards and probably as a 1 week punt, probably the best that you could go for. So that's why it's really important right now for you as a manager to understand when you want to wildcard and if then you're looking to potentially use a transfer. Remember, you can roll transfers through wildcards this year, which is an absolute game changer. But also, if you're going to wildcard in game week 4, maybe there are opportunities in front of you that are too good to ignore, and one of those could be Brentford. So I want to show you these fixtures, show you why I'm not wildcarding in game week 3, but why I'm considering a wildcard in game week 4 and the teams to target. So take a look at the best Nkunku replacements for my own team, because remember, I already have both Rodgers and Smith Rowe in my team, and for anybody that's looking at just like generally all of the players to consider, I do think Rodgers is slightly more of a preference pick over Smith Rowe, but you do need to consider the Champions League coming up, and I would recommend checking out my previous video if you want to in terms of a deep dive on the best Nkunku replacements. But these are the 3 that I've come to, maybe surprising some of the picks here. So Eze, I get it, being sold by loads of managers, but for me, I think if I'm looking to wildcard in game week 6 onwards, this is actually the sort of player that I want to bring in. Guaranteed minutes, talisman, and when you take a look at the numbers here, 12 shots, 0.94 XG, 0.3 expected assists. On another day, you can see the expected FPL points. He's on 10 points and nobody is batting an eyelid. But all of a sudden, because he's on 4 points, everybody is looking to sell him. For me, yes, 2 game weeks worth of information is not enough to come to a conclusion to, but this is a player that's proven in the Premier League, proven as a Crystal Palace talisman, and still putting up brilliant numbers in those opening 2 fixtures. So I think Eze is a fantastic option, and I'm actually hoping more than anything his price does fall to 6.9 million to free up some funds if we want to, especially with that Nkunku price drop already happening. So I'm one of those managers actually looking to jump in on Eze. The big thing for my team is, do I really want to do it with a game week 3 fixture against Chelsea? Again, it feels a little bit 1 week too early to do so, and that is why, as I've discussed, rolling the transfer is actually a consideration, but we'll come on to that later. In Mbeumo, this is a player that's only a consideration for my team if we look to wildcard in game week 4. I do not want him in my team for game weeks 4 and 5, but if I am tied down to a wildcard in game week 4, this is my pick. Now again, the numbers are not as good as that of Eze's, for example. 0.1 XG, 0.65, so it's all about playing the fixture here against Southampton, who conceded a lot of big chances in game week 2 against Nottingham Forest. So in Mbeumo, a little bit of a riskier one because you are almost committing to that game week 4 wildcard, whereas go for someone like Eze this week, you know you could wildcard in game week 4 if you wanted to, but also keep him longer term. The last one's going to be Luis Diaz. Now, I'm really frustrated here because I was looking initially going for a Jota-Diaz combination during pre-season, but I got a little bit scared about his minutes. But I think he's playing too well to be a rotation risk. Now, of course, Liverpool have signed Chiesa, but we don't really know whether he's coming in as a right-wing option, centre-forward option, left-wing option. Regardless, I think Luis Diaz remains an amazing option for our FPL teams. And again, doesn't feel like the right game week to bring him in game week 3, similar to that of Eze away against Man United. But would I be surprised if Liverpool got a positive result against them? Probably not. So Luis Diaz for me is one of those that would come in this week knowing that I want him for at least 3 game weeks with Forest at home in 4. And of course, a great fixture in game week 5. And the numbers have been fantastic. 1.63 XG, 1.09 expected assists. He's actually been one of the best of all the Liverpool attackers. And I do feel like I want to go there. The only problem with Luis Diaz, and again, this is more forward planning, with my 1.5 million in the bank, if I was to do Nkunku to Diaz, it would then leave me short to potentially do Alexander Isak to Watkins in a future game week. And again, it comes down to it. Maybe rolling the transfer this game week actually is the right move because I'm not completely tied down to a game week 4 wildcard, so Mbeumo's kind of off the cards. And even though I want Eze and Luis Diaz, it feels like they could wait 1 more game week with the fixture that they have. So here's my game week 3 team selection. First up in goal, we still have Henderson away against Chelsea. Now, if I was wildcarding, he would be out the door quicker than anything, but we're not wildcarding, so he is going to stick in the team. No reason to sell him right now, just because I can't justify using a transfer on a goalkeeper. My backup's Bentley, who of course isn't getting game time either, so it's a little bit of a nightmare with goalkeepers, but we're just going to stick by with it because sometimes clean sheets come up in the most unlikely situations. In terms of the defenders, they pick themselves this week, and there is no reason to make a transfer of any of these. Saliba at home against Brighton, fantastic. Even though Brighton have been very good, I still back the Arsenal defence in any fixture. Robinson away against Ipswich, again, proved his attacking prowess last game week, and I do think Robinson is also a great pick long-term in our team, so I'm really happy to have him in, especially with a lot of managers going there, knowing that there could be a price rise in the future. And finally, Trent away against Man United. Again, if you're paying 7 million for a defender, you play him in every single fixture, especially someone like Trent, who is just looking fantastic in those opening 2 weeks. Now, slight concern, obviously, with the reaction that he had being substituted early in game week 2, but unless I see some rumours that he's leaving, he is absolutely sticking in my team. And I feel a little bit unlucky that he hasn't actually had some sort of double-digit return, and it could come in this Man United game. In terms of the bench defenders, Lewis Hall possibly being a bit of a problem, lost his place in game week 2, might be one of those players that I'm going to be losing in a wildcard in the future, but for now, sticking on the bench, and of course, Barco, who's gone on loan, is always going to remain my 3rd bench option. And it's worth noting, this team currently has one free transfer and 1.5 million in the bank. And importantly, we now got to take a look at the midfielders. Moving into my game week 3 midfield, and as you can see, Nkunku stays in the team, but we're going to touch on that in a minute. So Saka at home against Brighton, absolutely happy with that, and maybe even a differential captain for some managers out there. Rodgers and Smith Rowe, I'm going for the budget enablers to start. Now, my hopes aren't as high as some of those new owners out there. I do think they're great picks, but remember, these aren't guys who are going to be scoring you braces each and every week. If I can just get one attack in return from either of those, I will say that is a good game week. So both of those are starting for my team. And of course, Diogo Jota away against Man United, who I'm more than happy with in my team. Now, we got to talk about Nkunku. So we spoke about how I'm not wildcarding in game week 3. We spoke about how a game week 4 wildcard absolutely is a consideration, but I'm also not completely tied down to it. So that is why I've ruled out Mbeumo as a 1 game week punt. I like it, but I also don't love it. And I don't really want to be wasting a transfer for someone like Mbeumo that as a knock-on effect will basically force me to wildcard in game week 4. So that's why I've ruled out Mbeumo. And I haven't ruled out a game week 4 wildcard, but I just don't want to go to Mbeumo to force a game week 4 wildcard. So that reason is why it's happened. In terms of Nkunku being sold, we spoke about Eze, we spoke about Luis Diaz. Those two are really my top targets. However, I know I'm taking a risk with price drops, and I know it will inevitably happen over the international break. But that international break, the fixture swings that actually happen in game week 4, makes me think I actually maybe am in a bit more of a powerful position, giving myself 2 free transfers and 1.5 million in the bank come game week 4. We got Arsenal assets coming into a tough run in game week 4. That could be a cash cow for my team, alongside selling Nkunku, maybe get to a midfielder that I want, not this week, but next week. So I think the flexibility is actually going to be much better for my team. And yes, it means I will have to ride out a couple of price drops potentially, but I would much rather have that flexibility in game week 4 than forcing a transfer in this week when maybe it isn't the right player for my team. And also, with the likes of Newcastle players on my team, also could mean maybe upgrading one of those to a certain Ollie Watkins, which we'll come on to in a minute. So right now, at the time of recording, remember it is Thursday, I am actually looking to roll my transfer and give myself 2 in game week 4. But of course, I will be dropping a video tomorrow discussing that in detail if anything changes off the back of the press conferences. But let's take a look at the forwards. So finally, take a look at the game week 3 forwards here. We have Haaland away against West Ham. I actually think that's going to be a trickier fixture than we first thought, especially with the recruitment from Lopetegui in that West Ham team. But right now, obviously, I'm not selling Haaland with that hat-trick in game week 2. Alexander Isak at home against Spurs. Now, a lot of people are selling him. I believe he's the most sold player. I, for one, am happy to keep him for this game. My eyes are on Newcastle, though, because I don't think they've been good in the opening 2, and I do feel pretty content actually parting ways in game week 4. And as I've spoken about, another reason why I might want to roll my transfer is to give me some flexibility, allow myself to see Ollie Watkins actually play more than 65 minutes first and foremost in game week 3, and then allow myself maybe an upgrade from Isak to Watkins, and that could be the route to go for. So I'm keeping Isak for 1 more week, and of course the new boy Muniz away against Ipswich, more than happy starting him there. So the final decision for my game week 3 team is of course captaincy. So right now, the captaincy is going to be on Erling Haaland away against West Ham. But as I spoke about, I do think this is a tougher fixture than what we first thought. I do think Saka at home against Brighton needs to have a little bit of more thought by myself. Outside of those two, I don't think I'm happy with any other pick. Diogo Jota could do well against Man United, but I think for me, it's either Mo Salah or nobody as captain in that Liverpool team right now, just from a confidence perspective. So my team at the moment picks itself with the captaincy on Haaland. If you're one of those managers that maybe is sat there with Cole Palmer, I actually do think Cole Palmer is a better captaincy pick than Erling Haaland this week. I just think that's a great fixture at home against Palace with their defensive frailties right now. But for my team, it feels a bit obvious going for the captaincy on Erling Haaland. Yes, guys, okay, that's going to wrap up today's Game Week 3 team selection video. As I spoke about, I have Nkunku and I'm looking to keep him with rolling my transfer going into game week 4. Now, if you want to stick around, of course, for any future updates, I will be doing a final team discussion video where basically we'll be looking at the press conferences and my team in future game weeks. So make sure you do stick around for that video tomorrow. And of course, the deadline live stream on Saturday, where I will be updating you of any last minute changes to my team and of course, any news in the FPL community. So if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you drop a like and of course, smash that subscribe button. Have an amazing day. Take care. I'll see you real soon. Cheers.